Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Moses and you are listening to the AHP Leader podcast. And this particular podcast is a series of 3 conversations looking at changing the culture within race, ethnicity and culture. So this third and final podcast of this series invites some new panel members as well as our existing original panel members to really open up the space for an inclusive conversation on how we can really start to make a difference. So with that in mind, I just want to start by asking the panel to introduce themselves. So Mish, if I can come to you first.
Yes, hello everybody. My name's Mushra Ahmed Landayu, but preferred address is Mish. I'm a senior lecturer at London South Bank University and also joint founder of BAME OT UK Network.
Thank you. Rafiah.
Hi, I'm Rafiah Badat. I am a speech and language therapist and I'm also a clinical researcher. So I'm based at City University of London studying digital therapy, and I'm based at St George's Trust in South West London. And in terms of my background, I'm British Indian.
Thank you, Rafiah. Claire Angus.
Hi, yeah, I'm Claire Angus. I'm Director of Membership Services at the College of Podiatry, so I'm overseeing our trade union professional support and all support for members there, and I identify as white British.
Thank you. Claire Sullivan.
Thanks, Rachel, and afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Sullivan. I'm the Director of Employment Relations and Union Services at the Charlton Society of Physiotherapy. So I head up the CSP's role as a union. Prior to that, I was a physio working in the NHS in London, but that was a very long time ago. I'm also white British, and I'm going to say one other thing because I think it might be relevant to our conversations this afternoon, because I very much fit the stereotype of what most physios looked like 35 years ago when I qualified, in that as well as being a white woman, I'm also middle class, and I think the socioeconomic factors are kind of very much interlinked with the race equality issues that we'll talk about today. So thanks, that's me.
Thanks, Claire. Naomi.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Naomi McVeigh. I'm Regional Head of Allied Health Professions for Health Education England here in the Northwest, based in Manchester. I'm also a physiotherapist by background, spent early parts of my career in London and the Southeast. And I'm white British and probably very similar in respect of what Claire just said too.
Thank you.
Except younger.
Only a little bit, Claire.
Mariel.
Hi, I'm Mariel Morris. I'm a reader in physiotherapy at Brunel University in West London, and I'm an educator. In previous life, I was a neurophysio, and I also do a lot of research, and that's a mixture of clinically related stuff, but also in education and diversity within physiotherapy. I'm not sure I identify really as being white British. I am white British, but spend a lot of my life overseas, so culturally I'm a bit more of a mix.
Thank you. Jemima.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I am Jemima Kolabunde, and I'm a first contact physiotherapist. I just completed a Global Health and Leadership Fellowship with Health Education England and South Africa. And also a couple of years ago did a Master's in Public Health, so that's a special interest of mine as well. And also I was born in Nigeria, grew up in Ireland and moved to England to work, and I've been here ever since.
Thank you. Ganesh.
Hi everyone, I'm Ganesh Baliah. I'm the Regional Head of Allied Health Professions across the Midlands and East of England for Health Education England. My clinical background is in podiatric surgery. I was born and raised in Britain, but of Southern Indian heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon.
Hi everyone, I'm Sharon Ajay Nicol. I'm a speech and language therapist by background. I am about to start a role as a senior lecturer at the University of Greenwich, but previously have been doing my PhD and also working in private practice. My parents are both Ghanaian, but I was born in the UK, in Essex, so Black British is what I identify as, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And Adine.
Hi everybody, my name's Adine Adonis. I'm a clinical specialist neurophysio and I am originally from South Africa. So in South Africa I am known as coloured, and in the United Kingdom I'm identify as being black.
Thank you. Mish? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I forgot to say about the ethnicity thing completely. I'm British Bangladeshi, that's all.
Thank you, very important, thank you. So for those of you that have hopefully watched the first two podcasts, we really took the opportunity to listen to some of the challenges that exist, and it became evident, certainly in the first podcast, that racism and racial inequality is deeply ingrained, not just within all of our professions, but within our organisations in which we work. And we really start to talk about what we can do, particularly with this podcast, for the emerging leaders amongst us. So that's really people who have maybe been qualified a little length of time and who may undertake appraisals, who may have some management responsibilities, or maybe who are just not those new learners who have left university and who have a bit of experience about them. This third podcast was really to open the floor to invite other people that have some responsibilities, maybe accountabilities, influence over our professional careers, and also influence our behaviours as well. So this podcast isn't about holding people to account, what people have done well, what people haven't done well. This is really about thinking how we can frame the next steps. And to do that, we've identified we're much stronger if we do it together. And we cannot become divisive. It cannot become about us and them. It cannot become about who's doing things well and who's aren't. This is about having a collective force which will hopefully result in lasting change. So the first question we want to kind of kick off with is to our professional organisation. So I'm going to come to Claire Sullivan first, and I think there's some real misconceptions about the roles of the professional organisations, and we'll talk about this throughout all three podcasts, but do you want to maybe talk about a little bit about what you're doing at the CSP and what's on your agenda?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Rachel. And I mean, I said to the others on the podcast last night that you could talk about the role of professional organisation all day, but it might be quite dull. So I will keep it short. I mean, I think that the first thing I think I'd like to say is that, you know, I introduced myself, I explained that I was white, I was middle class, I was British, I was female. All of that means that some of the things I'm going to say today are for me to reflect the conversations I've had. But I just want to be really clear that, you know, you've got panel members here who are going to be able to give you the authentic voice of their lived experience as people working in the NHS and elsewhere in healthcare who aren't white. And I certainly don't want to kind of take up that time. And the other thing I would say, and we'll come back to this when we talk a bit more later, is, you know, I have heard some things that have really disturbed, upset and shocked me over the last few weeks. And I say that as someone who spent 25 years representing members in discrimination cases in their workplaces. So for me to be uncovering things I wasn't aware of makes me think that there must be an awful lot more that is invisible to most of the people that aren't doing that sort of work. So the role of a professional body, well, the professional bodies in the health and care sector are kind of more than one thing. So some of them are just professional bodies, and some of you have introduced yourself as being involved with those. Others, of course, have the dual role of being a trade union as well as a membership body for professional and educational matters, and that will, I think, have a significant impact on what those sort of bodies do, and they'll be different. But the thing I think that holds them together is that the membership bodies in the health sector are largely democratic bodies with elected leadership, and that means that however effectively or ineffectively at any given time that lay leadership and the member-led bit works, there is the ability there, and it's really important that now is a time for that to be active, for those organisations to be led by their members rather than their employed staff. So I think that's important to say. And so just a little bit about what the CFP is doing, and what I think I'm going to say on this is that, and people who've been involved in the network, Adine, Jemima, will I think, be able to add to this, but the CSP has had a network for BAME members. It was originally called the BME network, a self-organised group, a network with several hundred members in it for 25 years. It was set up in the first year I worked at the CSP. It's met regularly. The numbers have increased hugely in the last 2 months, which is fantastic to see, going up from about 700 to about 850. And it's got new things going on, like it has a WhatsApp group now and so on. But it's been an active group. There's been training, there's been regular meetings. The BAME network meets with our other diversity networks. The network puts motions to our annual representatives conference, and they're debated there. We've done a lot of equality training with our stewards and safety reps over the years. We have a kind of widely used equality and diversity toolkit that we've just updated and relaunched. We've done extensive training with over a number of years that I won't go into in detail. We've had our black members have sat on committees at the TUC to which we're affiliated. For those that don't know the TUC, it's effectively a sort of club for unions. So I would say you could take all those things and say, gosh, haven't we done a lot? And yet it has not done the job it needed to do. And I've realised that over the last few weeks. So I think there's a real question for organisations about, when you say about the things you've been doing, have you been doing the right things? If you have been doing the right things, you clearly haven't been telling people enough about it or involving people enough about it. So I think that, and the reason I think it's so critical this afternoon is all the evidence shows that we're interested in people's life at work primarily on the trade union side, and all the evidence tells you that people are most affected at work by their first line supervisor, their immediate line manager, and that's where these emerging leaders are. So I think that their role is probably critical, and also more likely to be one that people can look at and recognise themselves in who they see. So the CSP is a very long way from getting all of this right, but very much has the aspiration to do so. And some of the things just that we can come back to maybe that we're thinking about at the moment is revisiting whether we should have a network of equality reps who are accredited and have some rights like stewards. We've, for example, this year put in a motion to TUC Congress about fostering real anti-racism at work. We've got, I'm pleased to say, out of 5 members who are a delegation to TUC, 3 of them are BAME this year for the first time, that many. We're developing a new equality, diversity and inclusion strategy with this year and next year's focus being on race. We're working with HEIs around our accreditation programme in a different way. We're looking at taking some positive action in terms of places for BAME members on our leadership development programme, and we're developing some new training packages for stewards that we're going to develop and deliver either face-to-face if we can, or virtually if we can't due to COVID. So that's just a kind of very quick rundown. And I just want to finish, and hopefully, because the other Claire will and Ganesh will know from a podiatry perspective as well, this is not just about the NHS for physio. You know, we've got a lot of BAME physios outside the NHS, many of whom are actually self-employed and are potentially kind of multiply disadvantaged financially, economically as a result of that. So it has to work for people across the whole of the health and care sector. So I will stop there because I'm sure, as usual, I've gone way over my time. Thanks, Rachel.
No, that's great. Thanks, Claire. Claire Angus, can I come into you, please?
Hi, yeah, obviously, again, as a professional body in a trade union college of podiatry, I'm going to reflect, some of the things that Claire Sullivan's mentioned. You would think on paper as a professional membership body, that we're custom made to be an ally for our BAME members. We're there to kind of make sure they kind of have the best of education and training in their career as their trade union. We aspire to make sure they have a safe workplace free from discrimination. Being member-led, again, you expect, we have the voice of our members at the forefront of all we do. And so actually, you kind of think, oh, we must be doing everything right. And I would say probably, honestly, up until 18 months, 2 years ago, we're probably working under the misapprehension that we were doing a good job, that we were an ally to our BAME members. But through actually kind of informal conversations with some of our other sort of networks and committees, particularly with some of the sort of students and recent graduates, some of the stories they started to kind of tell us where we'd kind of created these safe spaces and they felt able to open. I was sat in rooms and people were telling me things. I was a bit like, but surely, that doesn't happen. That must just be a one-off. And the more we started to kind of have these discussions, the more we kind of started to peel back this whole kind of situation of things we just were not aware about as the professional body. As the trade union, members were not necessarily coming to us with these situations and these discriminations they were facing in a sort of formal trade union way. And so we set up our Equality, Diversity, Inclusion group, which was member-led. And what we did, we made a decision not to kind of create any sort of criteria for joining that group. We just put it out to members and said, actually, if you feel passionate about this area, if you feel actually you've got a story to tell, come and join this group. And initially, actually, we didn't have a huge amount of interest. We had sort of maybe a dozen members come forward. But we said, actually, let's start. Let's still kind of go ahead. And we did kind of an activity with them. The first session we had, everyone was very polite, sat around a table. But we brought in a facilitator from the Open University to kind of help us have this discussion, again, because we were quite nervous about having that discussion, making sure we created a safe space. And the members that were there, they were asked to kind of say, you know, what sort of animal did they think the college was in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion. And they drew a lovely picture, which was basically like a toothless dog. So they said, you know, we're very nice and things, but actually in terms of this area, we're just, you know, we're ineffectual. We don't kind of really have much sort of say. We're not really kind of speaking out for these members from a BAME background. And as the kind of work's developed, more members have come on board. Initially, some members said, well, we weren't sure if it was just, you know, a kind of token thing. We weren't sure if the group was going to kind of have any impact. And over time, the group has kind of developed. It's much larger now. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, we had a specific meeting following this sort of Black Lives Matter movement kind of coming to the fore to really kind of put together a formal action plan that was wider than just our equality diversity work, but to really kind of look at it. So I think we were on a steep learning curve as a professional membership body. You know, we look at our council, it's all white. So again, we are missing key voices. And so we're working to take that forward. And I think that's where this kind of emerging leaders comes to the fore. We really need the guidance and support of these leaders to tell us, you know, how we need to move forward as an organisation to help us shape the future, because the issue has obviously been that it's been white members that have been leading it, and therefore inadvertently we've been kind of potentially being discriminatory in terms of the sort of support and services we're offering to our members, where naively we thought we were kind of there and a home for everybody. So I think, yeah, we've got a lot to learn, but I feel we kind of made a positive start. But again, these podcasts, again, listening to the stories we've heard here, has been a real influence. I shared them with our equality diversity group, and they've been sharing them in their workplace. So I think just having these conversations is really powerful and hopefully putting us on a path to a much better future.
Thank you. We're definitely going to come back to some of those points from the Claires, and thank you. That was really, really concise and powerful, actually. Thank you. Naomi, coming to you next with your HEE hat on.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm also going to try and keep this really brief. And like Claire, I've also heard things that have genuinely stunned and absolutely floored me over the past few weeks, and really share those reflections that we have so much more to do. So firstly, Health Education England has corporate roles and responsibilities as a national arm's length body in England, and its role is absolutely around delivering excellent healthcare and health improvement by ensuring the workforce of today and tomorrow has the right numbers, skills, values and behaviours in the right time and the right place. So it's got corporate roles and responsibilities as a national arm's length body, and also has a strategic framework for diversity and inclusion. But what I really wanted to do is just focus my answer in terms of our collective responsibility as a national and regional AHP leadership team, because I think that's the conversations that we've been having over the last few weeks. So we absolutely have a really important role in supporting diversity in both our pre and post registration education in partnership with HEIs and others. And I think as I reflect on what I'd planned to talk about, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is what we need to do, which I think tells you quite a lot in terms of what perhaps we haven't been doing. So I think there's some real need for openness and transparency of data, and not just data but also stories, and raising awareness of areas that absolutely need support and improvement. So for example, something that came up in a discussion on another workshop yesterday was that many AHPs working in NHS services, including quite senior managers, are unfamiliar with data around differential attainment and what that might mean in terms of truly supporting students to thrive on practice placements, and what that means in terms of them staying on programmes. I think then we talked about our responsibilities as managers and the relationship that people have with their first line manager. So as managers and employers, we absolutely need to value and use policies that support equality and diversity. And a number of times I've seen different opportunities across organisations go to people in the right place at the right time with the right contacts, and not always done on ability, talent and fairness. And that, you know, I think that really does need to change. And you know, it's a series of opportunities that will lead to bigger opportunities often. Crucially, I think, and I feel really strongly about this, we need to work in partnership with other organisations nationally and in regions. So making sure that we've got joined up approaches, so that we need to make sure the needs of specific professions are understood, but also that we're not working in silos, and some of the solutions and some of the action on this can take place across professions and you know, across regions and as well as nationally. And then we also need to think really carefully about how we better develop diversity within some of our regional forums and networks. You know, many of them are very, very white. There's, you know, and that needs to change. And so also sort of, I had a quick chat with Ganesh about this morning. You know, there's lots of policies and process behind this, but fundamentally this is about people and about how we support and work with people. And as managers and leaders, how we work openly and transparently and accountably as leaders, which means asking for feedback, means listening, it means acting as an organisation, it means acting as individuals. And many people can feel really uncomfortable in that space. We need to value the diversity and experience and ideas across our allied health professions and what this brings in terms of creativity and success, in terms of improvement and patient care. But the last thing I just wanted to mention is that importance around psychological safety. And no one of the previous podcasts talked about trust. And I think something we've been really intentional as a regional and national leadership team is what that means, what that looks like in terms of psychological safety, and what it doesn't look like, and then what that enables you to do in terms of having safe conversations. And I think that's something we need to do as an organisation, and to work with our partners across the system. And then of course there's what we need to do as individuals, but we'll come on to that in a minute. That's it from me, Rachel.
Thanks, Naomi. So Mariel, I'm coming to you with your multiple hats on, but mainly from like an academia, researchy, you know, perspective, and how you can bring your experiences and opinions in.
Thanks very much, Rachel. I think the first thing to say is slightly different because, of course, HEI is not one thing. You know, every university, every HEI body is its own institution, which creates some. There are similarities, of course, but also creates some issues. So, just to put some context, what I'm going to talk about, of course, is my own experience within my HEI in particular. And the other contextual thing I kind of want to talk about is the fact that therapists, and again, I'll talk from a physio perspective, working in academia, are working within two institutional hierarchies. That we have our own professional one, we're all clinicians, we're all members of CSP or whichever professional body, and have gone through that training, that kind of process, but we're also within the ivory tower. And that creates a number of dynamics. One is, and I know this came up in a previous podcast, I think most clinicians who go into academia feel like they're academic imposters. Which means that it's quite challenging in all sorts of different aspects to work within that process and actually shake some of the consequences of racism within that institution, which is strong. Let's be clear about that. And I know Adine in the previous podcast has come up with some of the stats with that, and they're very real, and they're very real within the AHP professions. But within that context, I just want to focus a little bit on what I think HEIs can do, we do, and maybe try and tackle, or at least suggest some of the things that we are trying to do and maybe focus on as well. So one, of course, is research. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to spend most of the time talking about students. But, you know, we do research, and some of that is educational research. And I think what's critical here is a need to one, we've done some research that talks about actually how these things play out, how race plays out in professional education for health professions. And I know there's been some criticism that we all know the facts and figures, but sometimes if the facts and figures are not in our profession, it's very easy to say it doesn't happen here. Or if we're not hearing the narratives from students in my experience and the research that I've done, it's easy to say, well, that doesn't happen with our students. And the truth is that it does. And having that very clearly written out and put there makes it much harder for us to pretend that it's not happening. It is happening, and we need to take that on. The other thing is that educational research in and of itself is kind of this is my personal view, a kind of stepchild really in some sense, of that clinical research is given much more priority, much more credence, much more funding, much, and actually educational research is limited. And I think within that, particularly researching how we do these things, and that will be something that I keep coming back to. Okay, we know that there are issues there. We've got ideas of how we may be able to work together to do those, but actually really doing that work to go, well, are these things actually working? How have they developed? We have different research processes now through co-construction, working as groups, but actually what is working, how that's working, and how we can disseminate that. I'll come back to that in a bit. But it's really the kind of working with and for the students, which I guess is my main point. And I was rather amused at one point thinking about emerging leaders, because in order to do the kind of work I wanted to do in this field, I had to step down from a leadership role, because actually as the program lead, I simply did not have the time to do any of the things that I really felt like I needed to do. So I actually stepped down from a leadership role in order to have the space, the freedom and the time to actually do the work I wanted to do with my colleagues and my students, which is kind of ironic. The second half of that is actually what I've learned is that the emerging leaders here are the students. Every time. They are incredible, actually, is my simple summary with that. And the first thing that we've been working with our students for quite a while now as a backdrop to some of the research that we did, was this safe space for conversations. And I can't overemphasize how important that was. The student position is a very, very tricky position. To even have conversations with us, it doesn't matter how much they like us, how much they trust us, in the end, we're judging them. We're giving them a grade. When they go out in clinical placement, they're being graded by these people. These people will be giving them a job or not, as the case may be. So actually bringing up issues, bringing up concerns is a really, really tricky position for them to be in. So the first thing we've had to do is create these safe spaces and work out how we're going to do that. And in those spaces, recognise where we together should be identifying how the how really, again, to challenge educational process, and then how we might actually enact that in a particular way, but also areas where they can go outside of academia. There will always be things that they don't want to discuss with us. So how can we create systems outside, whether that be mentorship, problem solving groups or whatever, outside of academia. So these safe spaces are absolutely critical. And one of the key things that we came out with from those discussions was that we have to embed diversity in what we do and how we do it at every single level within education. So right from the off, that actually it's when we look at it, and we're in the process at the moment of doing a curriculum review, actually looking at what we're talking about, how we're talking about it, when we're talking about it, time and time again. What we're demonstrating is that we are not talking about diversity, and we are not giving those spaces within the curriculum, within our educational processes, or we're not enough. And the intersectionality in with that, and I pick up with the socioeconomic thing that Claire linked up, and that's for all students. And I think again, the students from in the what we call the BAME Action Group have really recognised that it's also for them. They learn from working in a diverse group. The white students learn from being in a diverse group, and all of them recognise that actually this is important for them and their own development, but also when they go out to work in the professional field. And working with the patients. But the other thing is that we need to prepare them for the real world. And they're really clear that the real world is not straightforward, and that they need to be have the tools and the strategies to work with that. Linked with that is clinical education. And I think we have a huge role within HCIs to work with clinicians to amplify the voice of the student in a safe way, so that those conversations can have. Because I think at the moment, clinical education, it's kind of a bit of it's not our responsibility, it's not the other's responsibility, it falls between the cracks, which is a problem. Just to finish off, two things. I think evaluating that innovation how is absolutely critical. And then once we're there, and I completely take the point that I think Naomi made here, is that we've then got to share it in a meaningful way. You know, HEIs have been positioned in competition with each other. That isn't helpful. That really isn't helpful. You know, we're graded against all sorts of different things and we battle against each other. That needs to go. And I've been very fortunate that a lot of my work has crossed over. We need to move out of professional boundaries, but also we need to find forums and really effective forums for sharing that experience across the whole diversity of everyone who's in this podcasting forum right now. The bodies, the network groups, the specialist groups, the clinical educators, etc., etc.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm not going to do a lot more talking, but what I do want to do, just for the record, and to kind of bottom out what we're going to talk about next, the conversation that I'm going to open up to our original panel members, is that the consistent message across everyone that's just spoken is recognising what hasn't worked. So there's lots of things like Claire mentioned. The quality and inclusion agenda has been very active within organisations for many years, but do people know about it and does it work? And the clear answer is it doesn't, in some respects, because when members wanted a statement, when members wanted a response from organisations of support, it was very slow and quite reactive in some sense. And what we don't want to do is dwell on, Mish said it really beautifully at the start when we were just chatting, is we're not going to focus on the things that are in the past, the things that maybe have or haven't been done. We're going to talk about what needs to happen in the future. So I want to come to one of my panel members and maybe if they have any conversation starters or anything they'd like to pick up from anyone. And if they don't, I thought we'll go for Rafiah and then we'll go for Mish. I was going to say it would be unusual if someone.
Yeah, I always have something to say. Speech therapist, right? I think just listening to all of you is just so great, and it's just so apparent this passion that's coming across in terms of this willingness to change. I guess. I really want to chat about the student experience, but just before that, just want to say very, very quickly, we don't really have the answers. We're just sharing our experience. We don't have the solutions. And I'm starting to feel a little bit fatigued, just because I volunteered so much to share my experience, knowing that I'm an AHP and from a BAME background. So this is, you know, almost not a duty, but, you know, I have a place to share. And as that's kind of evolved, I've realised I really don't have the answers. I'm not here to say this is what you need to do and things will improve. All we can do is share and collectively, hopefully, come up with some kind of ideas. They're not solutions because we try them, they might work, they might not, and we review and refine and move forward. So that was just kind of a short thing. But Mariel, I think it's so powerful to hear you kind of acknowledge the importance of the student experience. Particularly, I think if you speak to any BAME AHP, I think that's when they first realise that they're different. They don't necessarily belong in this AHP world. Prior to that, they might not have been aware. I mean, that's my personal experience, but I think having spoken to others, that was the first time, even to the extent of when I first walked in to the university and just looked around, and it wasn't anyone doing or not doing anything, it's just this dawning realization. And I'm working class, I came from a working class background, I commuted to the university, I was working part-time, I wasn't really affiliated with the social culture of, shall we say, Southern non-working class upbringing, so it was just whole new world. I cannot tell you how much of a shock to the system it was, and I didn't know how to get in, didn't know what to say, conversation starters, wanted to belong, didn't know how to, and I had to learn. I observed and I watched and I mimicked and, you know, developed. And I think that that's really, if that's my recollection of my first day at university as an AHP, but it's still happening. So if you speak to BAME students now, that's still their experience. So it's just to get across how influential that experience of being a student, and that's where it starts. And I think if we can start with something there. But Mariel, it was so great to hear that you are aware of elements of this, and I think having that conversation, and it's not, I picked this up in the last podcast, it's not BAME versus non-BAME. Non-BAMEs will be just as aware. They'll walk into the situation, they might see a BAME person say, wow, there's only one. Or even in speech therapy, it's males, there's so few males. The same kind of thing. You look around and think, oh gosh. And so, you know, it's this honest conversation right from the very start, and then that kind of obviously moves on to other things. So yeah, that's my little kind of input.
Definitely, and I think the way the influence amongst the emerging leader group, if you like, is with people are listening to think, well, how can I influence that? It's even just the placement, when we talk about placement experiences, and it's not presuming that that white student is going to turn up. It's about opening your mind to expecting anyone. And then Sharon, I mean, some of the work that you've been doing as well, you know, with it going into schools and really, you know, role modeling your profession is just incredible. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and the influence, the knock-on effect that's had, not just for the people like the schools that you visited, but also your profession and other people?
Yeah, so basically I've been involved for a couple of years now in going into schools to talk about AHPs in general. So obviously I'm a speech and language therapist, but I do have quite a lot of links in East London, which is a very diverse area, and lots of students kind of wanting to go into health professions, but often not being aware of the breadth of professions that are out there, and being kind of often just thinking very focused on medicine, you know, so kind of been involved in just talking about AHPs and what other things are out there. And it's been an interesting thing, and like in terms of listening to when I first used to go in, it was very much kind of linked in with their kind of careers advisors, but I now built links with the schools and kind of me going in on my own. And what I've noticed, what they've even said is that the questions that I get asked when I'm delivering the kind of talk, a person from a BAME background talking to a students in a school that is predominantly kind of Black and Asian students, is very different to when they've invited people from non-BAME backgrounds to go in. And I think just that kind of discussion earlier about this open space, to kind of, they start asking questions like, so what is it like being Black in that profession? They wouldn't ask if somebody else had kind of gone in to talk, and kind of things that kind of might come up culturally for BAME students around kind of, you know, do you get respect? Have you experienced any racism? How have you been able to do X, Y, and Z? So I think it's really important to kind of, we've got to get the students in, we've got to kind of figure out what it is that's going to attract BAME students into AHPs. And we've got, you know, it's kind of different issues along the journey. And I think what I think is really important is that there's got to be this visibility, because this open space we're talking about, it still doesn't feel comfortable, even at that 16, 17-year-old level, to kind of talk, really ask the questions you want to ask, or say what you want to say, if you don't see somebody that you relate to, that you feel you can open up to. And then that kind of translates all the way through to students in university not feeling that they're lecturers, they can kind of open up to practice educators, you know, again, so BAME students are kind of not feeling they can open up or kind of say things on their clinical placements, you know, kind of. And then we get into like supervision in NHS roles, and you know, and I just think it's, people sort of wonder why is this important. It's because it translates all the way through. The visibility's got to be there, and this open space has got to be there all along the way, so we can really understand the issues at different time points, because they're not the same. So I think, yeah, the experience of kind of working at that level has been really interesting, and I think you know, lots more, you know, could be done in terms of getting in at that level and trying to open up the conversation. You know, why have you considered these professions? Why not? What are the issues for you as BAME sixth formers thinking about what next? I hope that kind of summarises it a little bit. I could talk about it for ages.
No, and I think the reason why I wanted to point that out is because our responsibilities here is the emerging leaders. It's about looking at what links you can create after this for long-lasting change, and giving people the permission. So if you're having that conversation with BAME colleagues and as AHPs to say, we need to do this for our profession, but also for our colleagues of colour, and for all these reasons you've just said, Sharon. So you are way ahead of the game. You've been doing this already. You know, we need to learn from you. So thank you. Adine and Mish, you both had wanted to come in. Adine, was yours linked to Sharon? Do you want to come in next and then I'll come to Mish?
Mine is just a quick one, really, to bounce off Sharon's point. One of the things I think we need to really identify where it happens really well, if we haven't done that already, and pay attention to it, is the recruitment process to get into university and the recruitment process to get onto AHP courses. It is incredibly skewed, and we've talked about it before in previous podcasts, but I can't emphasize that enough, because as a BAE member of staff who was on the program's selection committee for first year physiotherapy students, I was just gobsmacked at the inequality that existed right at the start. And that's something that we can't ignore, because as much as and as wonderful as it is trying to argue the point for AHP careers from a primary school level, never mind secondary school level, you know, when they hit the front door and when they try and get in the front door, it slams in their face, or that brick wall stays there.
Thank you, Adine. Mish, can I come to you?
Yes, I always feel so privileged and moved every time I hear all of your conversations. And I was just thinking, okay, everybody's saying, Naomi, both Claire's, Mariel, you're all saying anti-racism benefits all of us. And you're proposing that we need to move forward and change, because the current changes that have been around haven't shown any change. And I'm just wondering, how are we, what is it you think as emerging leaders you're going to use to measure that change and to have these accountability metrics for people who aren't changing, who are resisting, you know, because they want to keep their privileged spaces and keep the inequality because it advantages them? And I just thought, you know, there is such a strong willingness and such a strong wanting to do good, but at the end of it, I'm not clear what is going to be done and how it's going to be evaluated, measured, and what are the penalties really. And if we want people to go into underrepresented spaces, why are we not using pro-action more? Because it's allowed within the law, but we don't seem to shy away from it quite a lot. Because I hear a lot of execs saying it's not legal, but it is legal. So why don't we use it more? And things like that. I think and also just being Bangladeshi as well, having students who are Bangladeshi, their experience is so different from a Black Caribbean student, a Black African student. I mean, Africa is a continent, it's full of different countries, it's not one monolith culture, you know. And it's just, when we have those safe space discussions, we might need to separate even more those safe spaces, because that did anyone watch that program, Trying to Make the School Anti-Racist? Mm-hmm. One of the important things was, when I found really cool to me, is when the BAME students were separated into Black and Asian. That was really telling about, still, you know, there's different things going on for these students and they have different needs. So that's just my observation from your initial discussions.
No, that's really insightful. Thanks, Mish. And Claire Sullivan, I think I'll come to you first, and then anyone else that wants to jump in. So I think it's what does good look like? How do we measure what that is? And how do we measure what the impact it has? Mish? Okay, thanks, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been nodding away at all the contributions, because I mean, everything that panel members have said so far, I have heard repeatedly over the last few weeks from the people I've been speaking to. And to some extent, those things have made me think more than ever that all the kind of stuff that we've been doing, and I say we, it could be not just the CSP, but it could be anyone. It's clearly not hitting the spot, because things are not substantially better. They're a bit better for some people, but they're not substantially, consistently better. And I mean, Mish's last point about how do you make things change? How do you hold people to account is a fantastic one, because I think we've tended, certainly in the CSP, to take the approach, you know, I mean, the physios on the panel will know this. Physios have a kind of reputation as a profession of being kind of nice, being a bit frightened of having difficult conversations. And yet, some of the things I've heard that are going on beneath the surface have been really shocking. And it's not 30 years ago, it's not 20, it's now. And that relates to the things you've already talked about, experience on clinical placement, it relates to experience in the workplace. And I think that, and it feels like a lot of it, I mean, I think that I've been sort of had the wool pulled over my eyes by myself, if you like, by the fact that I think what professional bodies do quite well is tackle overt, serious discrimination, legal discrimination, if you like, because you can see it usually, you can do something about it, and it's everything that isn't that has been very hidden, and people don't feel they've got the safe space to raise it. And one of the things I was reflecting on was why, you know, somebody like me, you know, I've kind of, you know, left the profession to work at the CSP because I was so passionate about fairness at work and equality of opportunity. So why haven't I been better? You know, I've been in charge of the CSP's trade union function now for nearly 6 years. Why has this been invisible to me? And some of the things that I've been thinking about is we've taken this approach often about kind of exhorting people to understand and celebrate diversity and hoping that everyone would want to get on that kind of wagon with us. And it's clearly not enough. And there is something about what Mish is saying about just saying to people, look at everything you're missing out on, is not changing things fast enough. So we've got to we can't just keep doing more of the same. Now, professional bodies, some of you have said it, are not known for doing things like rapidly, you know, so there are processes everywhere and there are decision-making processes. And, you know, like the NHS, we've done more quickly during COVID than probably previously. But, you know, the democracy of these organisations, which is very important, does not lend itself to speed. And things do feel slow. And I totally get that. And I remember feeling like that as a member myself. And that's not to defend it. I'm just saying that's the way things are. But there's no point us just doing more and more urgently of the same, because the same clearly is not working. It's not working in changing the numbers of Black and Asian and other ethnic minority members coming into the profession in any significant numbers at the moment. So lots more coming into training. Student experience is a problem. Attrition from the NHS amongst qualified people is a problem. We think we've got to look at the numbers. So, and I've been thinking about, you know, we need to stop. I think this is somewhere where we need to do so. I've been thinking about maybe a sort of trying things out innovation type approach on something. So let's try some different things that we don't have evidence to say will necessarily work, that are led by our Black members. I totally agree that, you know, we've talked before about the term BAME. It's, you know, it's a term, everyone needs a term, but we talk about BAME as if it's one thing. And it's not one thing, and you've already said it, that the experience, I mean, I know from my conversations over the last sort of 6 weeks that the experience of Black female physios is very different from the experience of a lot of Asian members of the CSP, and that will be replicated in every sort of different, you know, group of people. So we have to be really careful about lumping people together. Mish, I'm absolutely where you are on positive action. I think people use positive discrimination being illegal as an excuse not to take positive action, because it's not popular taking positive action. It's popular with one group, but it's unpopular elsewhere. And we're not very good at doing things that we don't think are going to be popular. So I totally agree. We need to do much more to take positive action in a whole range of areas. And that may mean dialing back on some of the other things that we would normally do, which we would say are kind of upholding kind of equal opportunities in terms of things like recruitment and selection. But actually, I think goes back to Adine's point, and I'd love to hear more, Adine, about some of those sort of the unequal playing field you were discussing. But actually it's all very well having our equal opportunity processes, but if actually we've already got a bar that is not the same for our BAME members as it is for white members, actually it's not equality, and we may need to approach it differently. And the last thing I would say, and this is I think a frustration for me and probably others from professional bodies, is our reach into people's workplaces is better because we've got our reps in workplaces in the NHS, although not so much elsewhere, but we are not in those places. And our direct ability to have an impact on people's everyday workplace culture and behaviours has got some limitations. And we need to work out what we can do to start to challenge that when we are by necessity at arm's length. And also, I mean, you know, and I remember this as a member myself, frankly, there's nothing more irritating than a professional body telling you what to do. You know, sometimes you want an answer to a question, but you don't want people telling you how to do things. So we have to also be careful about how we are doing things with members, and in this particular instance, led by members. So we can't double the number of BAME members or indeed BAME staff we've got overnight. But what we can do overnight is give much greater place in decision making to BAME members. We can do that. There's nothing to stop us doing that. So I think we've got to do a whole load of things that are quite radically different from the things we've done until now, as well as doing more, and that requires more resource behind it. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Thank you. Jemima, can I come into you?
Yeah, sure. I think my question seems a bit redundant now after everything Claire's just said. But I think I'll put it forward to Naomi as well. I know Claire's talked extensively about what's not working and just kind of employing historical strategies on the same problem, but it not producing the right effects. And yeah, Claire, you've mentioned a lot of great things, lots of fantastic things. I guess one of my questions is that if we're trying to be more innovative and include more BAME members, then how do we do that? Practically, what does that look like? And how do I keep the CSP, or how do BAME members keep the CSP accountable? Is there a time frame for any of this? Naomi mentioned collaboration as well. Now, how do we collaborate with the Health Education England? What does that look like? And if we're experimenting, what are we experimenting on? So essentially, what I'm trying to decipher is what does any of this look like? Because yes, we can have all this conversation and talk about all the things that we could do, but then after this podcast is over, what then? What next? Do we have the same kind of podcasts in another couple of years when something else happens? So I think it's really, really fantastic that we're having this conversation and different people from different spheres are coming together. But in essence, I would like to know, how do we practicalize some of these things and see evidence for it? I think it aligns with what Misha said as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Jemima. Naomi.
Thanks, Rachel. I think these questions about what are we going to do, when are we going to do it, and how are we going to do it are being the conversation that we've been grappling with in terms of the Northwest, and trying to get that balance of acting quickly, but acting effectively. And so one of the things we've been doing is, and I'm sort of loath to say looking at more data, but we have gone back to look at some more data across the different professions. And I think one of the things that's really key is some professions are doing really well at this, or better than others. And so I think there's something really key about what we learned from the AHP professions who have been really successful in increasing diversity within their new workforce. And my orthoptist colleagues have particularly sort of pulled me up on, pulled us up on, in terms of not speaking across all AHPs in the same way. So I think there's something to learn across different professions in terms of what they've done well, some of that success and what's worked. but also using that baseline data to measure improvement, so that we've got that data now across all of the professions, across all of the different bands within the NHS. Obviously my remit's for the NHS, so to terms of measuring improvement. I think what's really complex in this is understanding who has what mandate for what. And this is sort of some of what Claire was talking about. So where we have a mandate and where we can sort of leverage some of that mandate and responsibility to get people to do things, as opposed to when it's more about influencing, supporting, and that can take time. But I think what we can see from the data that we've looked at in the Northwest is years of widening participation work hasn't worked in terms of the diversity of some of our professions. And I guess one of my questions is that because when you look at the data, applications to those professions are so oversubscribed, we haven't had to work very hard, or we've potentially become, I don't know, complacent in terms of who we're attracting, and now we're looking at what we need to do to increase that diversity. So I think it's really challenging. Just to pick up on the question about what does collaboration look like with HEE, I would say just reach out to your regional HEE, AHP colleagues, and I'm really happy to share those details on Twitter, because we're really happy for people to come forward and speak to us. And I'm sure Ganesh would add to that, but I'll share the details, Rachel, on Twitter.
Thank you. Sharon.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick point off the back of some of what Mish was saying about sort of accountability and just positive action. And I think for me, I think a lot of the time I found that people that engage most with this work around improving diversity, you get a select group of people, and there's this kind of the same people wanting to engage and kind of be involved and listen. And I do think at some point we have to look at enforcing this across, like it being a part of our professional scope, like part of what is expected of an AHP in terms of, I don't know, when we have to register for HCPC and make sure we've done X number of hours of CPD or whatever, that it becomes something that is kind of seen as just part of something we have to ensure everyone's engaging in. And because I think I do think it's always going to be something that is like voluntary or it's open for this, it's just the same people that engage in the same issues kind of continue. And until it's like seen as something that's a priority and everybody has to see it as a priority, because this is our role, we're trying to do this as a body of AHPs, I think this will continue to be an issue. And I think, going forward, it's about figuring out the ways that the professional bodies and like HEs and like kind of, and HCPC, whatever, can kind of look at how do we engage this in, like include this into what it is seen as, what does a good AHP look like when we have our kind of values and all of that. Because I think otherwise it's just this kind of constant kind of certain people resist, certain people engage, nothing kind of changes more broadly. So that was just my little kind of tuppence, if you like.
No, it's really important, and it's about the tokenisms as well that we've talked about in the previous podcasts, and it's about the equal playing field and the equal opportunities, and people don't want things handed to them. It's about having the right opportunities and having the barriers removed. So yeah, Sharon, completely. Ganesh, coming into you.
I'm conscious I'm the only male on here. Is that why I'm speaking last now? Mariel, I could listen to you all day. It's fantastic hearing you speak, and actually, and this is no disrespect to our other guests here, and thank you for joining us. When you talk, I see that you mean what you're saying and you want to make a change there. So when we talk about how do we make that change, it's being genuine. I can see you want to make it happen. Claire, embarrassingly, I didn't even know this work was going on with the college, and as a member of the college, I apologise, but equally, it hasn't reached out to me somehow. So there's obviously an issue with how the work that is being carried out there is advertised. And those that know me well, if they don't catch me on an email, they're not going to catch. It looks like the matrix in my inbox at the minute. So other methods of engaging would be useful. I guess on that, on the Facebook pages for UK podiatry, etc., when people have tried to bring up issues related to race, it's quickly closed down because it's not considered relevant or clinical. So when we've got people with that mentality, how is it comfortable or safe for people to have those conversations? And I'd also like to understand what a safe space looks like, because my only qualification for being involved in this conversation is I feel the colour of my skin. I listen to a lot of you talking and Claire Sullivan talking. It's fantastic, that energy that's coming out, that the experiences you have, but equally I have that lived experience, and I'm going to engage more, feel comfortable more when I'm speaking to people with similar experiences, or people that look like me. I guess as well with that work, and I'm really not picking on the college because I'm happy that they're doing this work, is what are the expectations? Because you say, it's great, we had some people come over, some work started, and then nothing after that. What are the expectations? Because I think little pieces of work are great, but encourage that. Advertise the work that has been done, like we would with any other clinical piece of work, so people see the reason why to join this the movement, and have those conversations and make things happen. Empower the groups within those discussions as well, so they can take away actions and be accountable as well. Because like you say, having a room full of white middle class people with the best intentions are not always going to have that tribal following, whereas the other people may have the ideas and the energy to carry that forward. So it really is encouraging, but I think to see it grow, regularly input that into our journal or website, whatever it is, so people see what's coming out of those discussions as well. So there's some role modelling going on.
Thank you. Claire, Angus, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, Ganesh, I think that's a really good point. I'd say the work initially, I suppose it's that thing of the safe space discussion is really interesting. When we had the last meeting, again, there was probably 20 people there, and people said, that felt like a safe space, but how do we kind of make that space bigger and amplify that? Like you say, on forums like UK Podiatry, we talked about some of the things there. Some of the members of the Equality Diversity group had kind of put out information trying to get the conversation started, and like you say, it gets closed down. So we've been talking about how we can create a safe space, but also amplify that. And we talked about a conference, we could put on a workshop as a side stream, but then, like you say, do you get the same people who go along to that, who want to engage and want to kind of get involved in those things? Or could we try to recreate like these type of events, almost having a panel discussion on the main platform that really brings this discussion to the fore? We talked a lot about, at the meeting we had, about white privilege, which again, like I say, we've done a lot of work about trying to kind of support our BAME members doing more to kind of level the playing field. But actually, we've kind of been quite nervous about, outside of that safe space, talking about white privilege. How do we have that discussion with our white members? How do we raise this discussion with them? How do we make sure they are not kind of, carrying on these behaviours? And actually, that's quite, is that going to make members uncomfortable? Are people, like Claire talked about, people don't want to be told certain things, but actually maybe we have a responsibility. And I think the point, I can't remember who made it, about the training and CPD, we focus on the clinical, but actually should we be really making sure we've got CPD around this topic, about these things that we're talking about, so that the leaders, not just the emerging leaders who are BAME, but also our white leaders, are cognizant of these things as well, in terms of their impact they're having in their roles. So there's lots for us to do. And Ganesh, again, about the comms issue, again, I'll take that back to the group about how we make sure that we're talking about it. Again, because I'm conscious that we've got the Equality Diversity group over here, but actually we've got a whole governance structure Claire's talked about, like at her organisation, and actually it shouldn't be a side project. Actually, how do we embed that across everything? Our clinical senate, our employment forum, our membership committee, this should be across everything. It shouldn't be sitting as a separate group, in my opinion, at the moment, but that's where it is as we sort of start this work. So yeah, lots for us to work on.
Ganesh, did you want to come back in there?
No, thank you, Claire. And actually, the point about sort of making it regular discussion and topics for discussion, we've talked about that before. Naomi brought up, the differential attainment. The medical schools and the medical profession are, probably leading the way in terms of healthcare on that, but it's not advertised. I knew nothing about this work until recent, SMT meetings. Why is that not more widely available and discussed more widely? So, like you say, making that part of the regular agenda.
Corinne, just again for the record a little bit here for the audience that are listening, as a panel we have all had feedback from people reaching out with their own experiences, and Ganesh's experiences of maybe not known what's going on behind the digital walls where these conversations are happening at the moment. That's felt across the allied health professionals. So, and I know we've heard from Claire and Naomi about how they want to be more visible in what's going on. So as emerging leaders, your responsibility is to now go away and have a look through your professional networks, your online platforms, what's out there. Is the information readable? Is it relevant? Talk to your teams and ask what is missing and feed that back to your professional organisations or health education or the HEIs and say, look, let's work together here. This is what's going to work. The other thing about white privilege is we've spoke a lot about white privilege in these podcasts because this is where the change needs to happen. It needs to happen within the white leaders who are causing the problems, who are unaware of the problems, and that uncomfortable conversation and uncomfortable truth starts at the top but also at the bottom, and that's where Mariel comes in and everything she said about student education, empowering our Black, Asian, minority ethnic students to have that voice from a very early age so they can call it out, and empowering the white students to say this isn't right, this is what microaggressions look like, this is what racial inequality looks like, how can you support your BAME colleague that doesn't have the barriers and challenges that you have. So again, just to reinforce this for the listeners, that this is your responsibility. The first step is listening. You listen to this, acknowledging it, but then having those wider conversations with the teams. Now, Rafiah, I'm going to come into you. I know Claire wants to make a point before we start rounding up Claire Sullivan. So if any of the panel members want to jump in, please take the opportunity.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll be as quick as I can be. I guess three key things just from this conversation. So listening to all of you, it's redundant what professional body you're from. So this shows that it can be a collaborative AHP-wide initiative, and so it should be. And why reinvent the wheel here? Everyone's kind of working towards the same thing. So surely if people can collaborate and share ideas, maybe a working party across AHPs with the HEIs as well, it's just a stronger body, and it just, maybe the change will be faster. I know you're saying, Claire, about how sometimes the change is slow, but if everyone's working towards the same goal, surely working together it is the way to do it. And also, I think Clay said about clinicians don't always want to hear from the bodies of this is what you should do, and you know, and that kind of lip service, but there is that power in terms of consistency. And actually, if a message comes from an organisation, I think more people stop and think and listen, even if they don't think, oh, this doesn't really affect me, but that membership body does represent me, and if they're putting this across, then actually maybe we should listen. So maybe just acknowledging the strength of your voice as an institution or a body. And then I guess the third thing is, at the start of when these conversations started, I was so passionate about the fact that it has to be led by people with the lived experience, and I can hear that this is coming across. People are going out there and talking to people and finding out about lived experiences, but I think that then the next stage is reflecting on that, and the ideal would be having people with the lived experience being representative in the professional body already, so then it's part of their day-to-day paid salaried work. And that's why you're all here today, because it's your professional responsibility. But how do you then reimburse people who are doing this voluntarily? We're giving our time, but actually there needs to be more acknowledgement, because it's not just sharing our voices, it's then reflecting and analysing and thinking about what possible solution. I know I said at the right start we don't have the answers, but we're probably closer to having the answers than somebody without the lived experience. But then aren't we specialists then? If it was, say, speech therapy, neurology, but if it's something like feeding and it was dysphagia and we were giving advice, we're not just giving advice on how to swallow. We all know how to do that, but it's about how is that clinically relevant and what the advice. So we're giving consultative specialist advice, and I think that needs to be acknowledged, even if it's at the level of a student. If a student is sharing their BAME experience, what are they going to get back from that? What acknowledgement is there? And so it's kind of, there's no point if we're just expected to share it out of goodwill in our own time. Actually, we're doing something beyond that. We are putting ourselves into a place of reflection and analysing and giving something a bit more powerful. And so I think acknowledgement, I don't know this, again, don't know the solution, but kind of acknowledging that and thinking about sustainability, surely that's the way to have sustainability. And that's it. That's not.
I'm going to come to Mariel, but Mish, I'm going to come into you first. And Adine, that collaborative action you just put in the chat box, I love that. Thank you. Mish.
Yeah, I'm just following on from Rafiah's point, because there is abuse in this system of continuous talking. It's epistemic exploitation, it's cultural taxation, and because you do it for free, actually there's a mental and physical toll on that person to continuously having to carry this and talk about it. And yes, there should be remuneration if you're involved. And I think what's missing for me when I see all these discussions is that there isn't a people involvement in there. There is a lot of discussion of boards and bodies away from the people and then coming back to the people. That's not collaborative working, and that we know in literature says is failure, because you have not understood the receivers of your actions. You've just decided that that's what they probably want to understand and talk about and work with, and it fails. And that's why in college improvement it fails all the time, which is my PhD project. But and I think it's so important what Rafiah says, this exploitation of our experiences to no benefit is noxious, it's toxic, and it creates distrust. So we need to actively and show that we're not doing this as professional bodies, as organisations, that we're not doing this, that we're not going to keep exploiting our members. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Mish. I'm going to come to Mariel, then Naomi, then to Claire Sullivan. So, Mariel.
You're going to have to get me to shut up, because I've got about 5,000 things to say about what's just been happening. So I'll try and keep to it. I want to very, very briefly just say, in terms of the kind of emotional burden that you mentioned, Rafiah, but also Mish just picked up on. It's something that I was very kindly given as a piece of very clear advice when I embarked on the work that I did by somebody else within the university. And the strongest advice she gave me is that you don't do this alone. You do it as a group, and you definitely keep an eye on the consequence and the responsibilities that are passed on people with the lived experience. And actually have that as part of your process, and that whole thing of kind of remuneration, whatever that looks like, and there has got to be about priorities. Because if you value what you are hearing, if you are valuing what people are sharing, then you must acknowledge that value in some way, and that will probably look in different forms to different ways. So, for example, my colleagues who are involved in this work are very clear that what they want this to see is core part of their PDR, their professional development review, that their personal development, that is there in their criteria for promotion and things like that, not just something they're expected to do because they happen to come from that demographic, and that it's absolutely seen as core part of their work as an academic. Likewise, with the students, we're really clear that their time is valuable. For many of them, they have a job. So if they're working with us on this, they're not working on their job. And we need to create a situation that, whether it be through an internship, which is what we have at the moment, I'm very lucky that the university supported that, or whether it be some other remuneration. Sometimes it's just a bunch of us cooking a nice dinner to have the conversations with, that there is some acknowledgement that is something that they offer. But the point that I actually wanted to come on here was about values, and that relates to what many people have said, but also intersectionality, is that the values at recruitment, and I heard Dean's point here really strongly, are not just white values, they're white middle class values that the NHS supports, that that society supports. That's what I'm going to be very blunt about this. That's what we're looking for, when we recruit, and we're challenging ourselves to do that. It's a really hard challenge. It's a really hard challenge for us to move out of that comfort zone, but they are, and those are the values that when we look at how we deliver the curriculum are there again and again and again. And so it's hardly surprising that actually students from different value backgrounds, who we should be learning from, who we should be embracing, who we should be kind of just sharing in the maximum capacity we have for everybody's development, don't feel like they belong, whether that be through the gate to get in. And actually at our university, getting into the gate isn't the issue. It's the belonging and the attainment once you're there. That for us, other universities will have different issues. And I'm also sure that the students who get through the gate are the ones who've been able to navigate those values, both in relation to the kind of class and the expectations we have. And we have to really challenge ourselves with that and kind of go, why on earth are those values there? Why are we continuing with those values? Are they really important to us as therapists? And I'm not quite sure who said that, who made a comment about what do we want AHPs to be? We need to ask that question. What do we need to be effective? Is it absolutely necessary that we speak with a beautiful accent that nobody can actually identify where I come from in the country? No, of course it doesn't. And so we need to strip those things away and actually get to the heart of what it is we need the professions to be, to do their job in the best way they possibly can. And those are the values that we need to go. And I think if we ask that question very deeply, we will shift with them. And then finally, to accountability, that's got to be real. Yes, it's got to be on numbers, but it's also got to be on the experience. It isn't enough that we just get enough students through, that we get enough people from whatever background they are through the hierarchies, and that they survive that process. That isn't enough. Their experience of going through that process has to be better. And so that accountability for me has to be in numbers, but it also has to be that they don't do it by having to navigate and construct something that isn't real to them in order to blend themselves with the values that we've perpetuated.
Thank you. Sharon, Adine, I'm going to come to you next. Sharon first, and Naomi, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm going to come to you after that.
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a quick bit of reflection of some of what's been said around that kind of, as BAME students or early clinicians going through that kind of journey of trying to just get through the gate, kind of try and move up, progress, but then also have this burden of having to negotiate the kind of unconscious biases that you're experiencing and everything else. And I think personally, I kind of qualified at a time when there was very, very few Black speech therapists, and I almost kind of just distanced myself from even getting involved in that discussion, because I was quite kind of bitter that my peers can just focus on doing well in their jobs and just moving to band 6. I don't have the space to kind of be trying to do that, knowing that I've got to work harder to get the interviews and be trying to engage my professional body about kind of what the diversity of the profession. So I do really think, just kind of with the remuneration kind of discussion, just really appreciating this is like double the work that that other people might have to go through in terms of having to kind of focus on their careers, knowing that there's challenges on that angle anyway, and then carrying this kind of burden in a way, but obviously wanting outcomes and kind of having to reflect and kind of share experiences, sometimes really kind of personal negative ones, and kind of doing that alongside everything else. And I think it's really, really important to kind of see what's happening, like that we're sharing these, but it's especially those early kind of students that I kind of see now, students kind of doing podcasts. I just think, wow, you're trying to do that when you're also trying to get yourselves on the ladder. I can't emphasize enough kind of how important it is for people out there to kind of understand the context sometimes of kind of what these shared experiences are about. So I just wanted to kind of just put that out there. I think it's really, really important.
Thanks, Sharon. Adine.
It's just to echo everybody's thoughts and some of the discussions in the chat function. It is incredibly hard to navigate this space where, as a Black woman with a whole host of skills and expertise and all the rest of it, you still have to work doubly hard, irrespective of what level you are at. You have to work hard to get there, you have to work hard to stay there, and you have to work even harder to try and get any further. And the different faces that people like me have in different situations is emotionally taxing. And I remember very well coming from work many a times and just thinking, you know, what is the point of all of this? I can't be myself. I get pulled up for being too straightforward, for being too, my accent was too aggressive sounding, and Mariel will recognize some of these things because we spent a long time talking about it. But you know, a long time is talking till midnight with family or friends, etc., trying to navigate spaces and not having allies. And I think that's the most the hardest thing, you know, when you come into a new space, trying to have allies or friends as you go along the way is what makes it palatable, is what makes it bearable. And we all know that if you don't have those allies, it just feels like everything is even more of a struggle as you go on.
Thank you, Adine. Naomi, coming into you then to Claire S.
Yeah, it's just a really quick one, Rachel, picking up on some of the comments before about people giving their time and that time being exploited. I think that, you know, if we're going to take this really seriously across organisations, we have to invest resource in doing this and doing it well, and not expecting it to be done as a bolt-on or for people doing it as volunteers. And that will be and is a demonstration of absolutely taking it seriously, and whether that's resource in terms of, you know, staffing, staff time, funding expertise, etc. But it needs, you know, tangible resource behind it to really make it happen. And I think that's what we need to see more of. And then that would sort of, I think, address a number of concerns, but particularly that how we value that expertise. And we hear that as well from patients and patient representatives. So it's a really common theme about how we value expertise and what that brings to the changes that we make, and not expecting people to do things over and over again in their own time.
So I'm going to make a comment here as the white leader, and some of my colleagues do not understand this reimbursement of however you want to put it, financial value, time recognition, and you just don't get it. I think if we're asking our colleagues of colour to help us identify what the real systemic issues are here and relive some of that trauma and those challenges I've had, it absolutely is completely different from doing something in your own time. There is no comparator. So I just wanted to make that really clear. And if people still don't understand that, then that's something that I can explore with people separate to this. So thank you for those comments. Claire Sullivan.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Rachel. And as Adine sort of referred to, I think we're also passionate about this. We've also been sharing things we haven't got time to contribute in the chat function. But I think it is worth saying on the remuneration thing. I mean, I think they're absolutely massively important points. And I'll be honest with you, in professional bodies in general and trade unions in particular, you know, many of you will know, some of you here have even been reps, that you know, trade unions are kind of built on a tradition of giving your time for free. Activism, accredited reps and so on, and we're going to have to think differently for the first time, because everyone I've spoken to at the CSP has been saying exactly what you're saying here, that, you know, this is certainly not about a professional body or trade union telling people what to do, but it's definitely not doing it for them either. You've got to do it with people collaboratively. It's got to be led by our BAME members, BAME colleagues, BAME staff, whoever we're talking about. But it has to be, you know, kind of, in a way, it's part of valuing the contribution and respecting it, isn't it? That it's not just, you know, do all this, you're already doing all the heavy lifting on this. Oh, and by the way, so I think that is something we've all got in the unions and professional bodies to take away and think about differently. The other thing I just want to say is we haven't got time to discuss it now, but I think I'm really concerned about the kind of intersectionality issues relating to race, class, to an extent gender, sexuality, whether or not you've got disability, because I am in touch with a lot of our members who are in, our 3 network groups cover LGBTQIA+, members with disabilities and BAME currently, and I'm in touch with many members who are members of at least 2 and sometimes 3 of those networks. So again, you know, multiply disadvantaged people in terms of their life experiences, almost certainly, including their experiences at work. And the other thing I think to say, I mean, and just listening to Mish and, well, everybody, is that, you know, listening to these things. So first of all, I never leave one of these meetings without being furious, and I'm really struggling not to swear. But it just makes me want to say sorry on behalf of the kind of shame of white colleagues that are perpetuating this sort of thing, and all of us who are white in this situation. It makes me want to go and give people a hug, and that gets you into all sorts of trouble in the workplace, as some of you will know. But actually, I think the reality is that we shouldn't expect that the very people, our BAME colleagues who've been doing all the heavy lifting on this, have to share their whole life experiences to change the attitude of someone that should not have that attitude in the first place. And now we're going to say it's still your responsibility to change it. And the reality is, because of the current proportions of, you know, Black and minority ethnic members within most of our professions in AHPs, that we aren't going to be able to change this quickly enough unless we build, and I don't mean tokenistic white allyship, I mean proper, not being a bystander, getting actively involved, standing up when you hear something, saying something. Unless we can do that, this is going to take us forever to change, because it's not right that our BAME colleagues have to be the ones who are doing that. It has to, so we have to spend some time helping the many white colleagues, members of professional bodies who want to do this, with some assistance in how and how best to support it. Most of you will know that at the moment a lot of people are feeling paralysed by a fear of saying the wrong thing. And we just keep saying, you know, if the intention is right, sometimes if you do what, you know, you call a misstep, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's better than saying nothing, because at least you are saying, this is where I stand, which is beside you. So I think those are all things that, Rachel, if you could just organise another dozen podcasts, we could explore in a bit more detail, but I'll actually shut up.
So Adine has just commented, authentic conversations with meaning, definitely. And, you know, the first steps to allyship, Clara, is people coming into these types of spaces we've created. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone who's, again, put their time forward, again, for free, in their own time. It's been hugely appreciated, and I don't want to have the final word, so I'm just going to look around and see if anyone would like to come in for any comments. Ganesh.
Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to panel members and colleagues who've joined as well. I think, so I'm going to, 2 things. The first is kind of a bit of social commentary. Look at what, Lewis Hamilton divides opinion, but he's doing work. He's commissioned work for the engineering industry to understand why more Black and Asian and minority ethnics are not joining those professions and therefore moving into motorsport. So he's doing that. That gets hushed up. You know, no one's building on that. He, like Colin Kaepernick, he takes a knee, and you know he's starting to get criticised for wanting to continue that movement there. And you know he's got colleagues, and I'm sure none of those are racist per se. But when some of the drivers are saying, "Oh, we're not taking the knee; we've done it already," that's that covered, isn't it? So that reflects the wider population when we're saying, "Actually, we've done that. Tick, it's okay." So the expectations of what they feel is happening to address racism speaks volumes. In terms of what emerging leaders can do, you know, I was on one of my one-to-ones, I was asking about potential leadership development for myself. So you think about the usual suspects, an MBA, an executive MBA, whatever that may look like. And actually one of the courses that was suggested to me was around cultural intelligence, and actually some of the leadership programs that are delivered by the non-traditional companies, and actually diversity in leadership and leading in diverse, you know, regions, geographic regions, and you know, be brave. You know, make a suggestion about looking at different types of leadership courses, Go and work with diverse teams, because like the old adage, you pick up languages when you go and live in a country and learn the language there. How are you going to pick up culture, behaviours, and understand what motivates people if you're not immersed in that environment? So my message would be, be brave as emerging leaders, do research on the alternative leadership courses, and immerse yourself in these different cultural groups to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Anyone else like to come in, or have we just about round up? Mish?
I just want to say to the emerging leaders, what COVID-19 has shown us is that we can act effectively, rapidly. Be brave, be bold, and be fast. Do something, anything, one thing that works, and make a big show of it. Because once you start, you won't be able to stop. That's the truth of it. It's a systems issue. You start somewhere, it will go everywhere.
Be confident, be bold. Thank you, Mish. And on that note, I want to say thanks very much and take care.